One cruise line just made a big leadership move. A brand new Florida cruise port is already facing organized resistance before a single permit is approved. And if you're sailing out of Galveston soon, the biggest threat to your cruise might happen before you ever step on board. Hi, I'm Melissa, a university professor who loves to cruise and who loves to talk ship. Let's start with MSC, because I know this one is easy to miss if you're not paying attention, because most people don't really care about leadership at cruise lines, but as a business nerd, I'm kind of interested in this, because what it signals for the cruise line in the long term. So in case you missed it, MSC Cruises just appointed Roberto Brazone as its new president. And if you're like, who the heck is that? Well, that's kind of the point, because Brazone does not come from a marketing background where you're going to have heard his name. He doesn't come from loyalty programs, he doesn't come from guest experience strategy, but instead his background is shipbuilding, technical operations, and fleet development. And that detail matters more than the title. Why? Because when cruise lines want to redefine their brand, they bring in the storytellers. When they want to stabilize loyalty, they bring in guest experience leaders. But when a cruise line is racing to scale a fleet at full speed, they bring in someone who knows how to keep ships coming online without things breaking. Now, MSC has been expanding aggressively. New ships, new classes, new itineraries. I have admittedly never been the biggest MSC fan, but I will tell you, World America absolutely won me over. I sailed this ship last summer. Fan-freaking-tastic. Big improvement for the MSC fleet. And this appointment signals that growth and operational execution are their priority right now. So this opens the question of what comes next. Does this operational focus eventually improve the guest experience, or does it focus more on getting more ships in the water as fast as possible? So if you sail MSC, this decision will shape your onboard experience long before any new perk or program ever does. And that tension between expansion and resistance shows up again when you look to Florida. Why? Because a new cruise home port has been proposed in Manatee County near the Sunshine Skyway Bridge in the Tampa Bay area. This port is designed to handle these large modern cruise ships that we've been talking about and would add capacity beyond just Miami, Port Everglades, and Port Tampa Bay. Construction would take roughly 3 to 5 years if it is approved. Now, on paper, this looks great. It looks very logical. Florida, it's cruise central. Demand exists and the infrastructure exists. But the real story is not the port, but it's the pushback. When this news was announced, opposition began almost immediately. A change.org petition opposing the project gathered thousands of signatures within just days of the announcement. Environmental groups and local residents, they argue that the reason they're hating on this is because the port threatens marine ecosystems and local infrastructure. And this backlash started before formal approvals were even requested. And this timing matters because this is what cruise expansion looks like in 2026. Projects do not now get debated quietly behind closed doors anymore. Instead, public resistance, it's fast, it's furious, it's organized, and it's very loud, even in Florida, where the cruise industry has a lot of political and economic influence. So you can't always assume smooth approval, even in Florida, which is very cruise friendly. Now, if you're wondering whether this port will ever get built, the petition is only the opening move. This is going to be a long fight. And buried inside that proposal is something even more telling. The Manatee County plan includes a private island destination designed to complement cruise operations. Now, that's not accidental, that's strategic. Why? Because private islands solve problems cruise lines have been running into for years. With private islands, they're great. You have a captive audience, you got that money, you control guest flow, and of course the spending. You control the entire experience, and you sidestep many of the local political and over-tourism conflicts that a lot of traditional ports create. Royal Caribbean has had tremendous success with Perfect Day at Coco Cay. Carnival just launched Celebration Key last year. MSC has its well-regarded Ocean Key. And now new port proposals are baking private islands into their plan from the start. So private islands are no longer extras, but they're becoming more of like a core infrastructure for these cruise lines. And it stands to reason because they are very lucrative. Now, the unanswered question is whether this eventually shifts power away from the traditional ports entirely, or whether it simply redraws how itineraries are now going to be built. But either way, I'm starting to see a real shift in how this is balanced. And that balance between transparency and control comes into focus with a much heavier story. A 27-year-old passenger was found dead aboard Ovation of the Seas while the ship was docked in Singapore. Local authorities are involved, of course, and an investigation is ongoing. No cause of death has been released publicly and no speculation. Of course, the internet world and cruise world is going to chatter and talk, but there has been no confirmation of what has actually happened. Now, situations like this are heartbreaking and they're also deeply misunderstood. Cruise lines are not required to publicly disclose details about onboard deaths beyond what local law enforcement mandates. And we saw this with the Anna Kettner case back a few months ago. There was a lot of speculation, a lot of chatter, and people were getting frustrated because they felt like the legal system in the cruise line, in this case Carnival Cruise Line, were being really tight-lipped about it. But jurisdictional complexity and privacy concerns limit what can be shared, and that often does leave passengers with questions that never get answered publicly. So I'm not going to speculate here. We don't have any facts, but what is important to understand is that what you see in the headlines is only a fraction of what happens behind the scenes when something serious like this happens at sea. Now, while some ports are tightening their grip and some cruise lines keep their lips closed tight, others are considering closing the door entirely. Amsterdam officials have proposed a complete ban, I'm talking nada, on ocean-going cruise ships by the year 2035. Now, this is a part of a broader effort to reduce over-tourism and pollution. Now, it makes me sad. I did take a cruise out of Amsterdam last summer. It was great. I love Amsterdam. So I would be sad if this happens, but I understand the argument of why they're trying to do this. And while Amsterdam is not the first European city to push back against cruise tourism, a full ban is a much harder line than most cities have drawn. Now, 2035, it sounds really far away, but cruise ships are planned decades in advance. Itineraries are plotted out years in advance. So this matters now, because if Amsterdam follows through, other cities, they're going to keep a close eye. Amsterdam's a pretty big city. So the economic calculus could be shifting. So for many European cities, the perceived cost of cruise tourism might be starting to outweigh the benefits. Now, if this trend continues, cruise lines might be forced to rethink their European positioning in their itineraries entirely. So the question is whether the industry adapts fast enough to slow that momentum, or whether these restrictions become the new normal. And we've seen a lot of backlash in another European city, being Barcelona. There's been a huge push against tourism in general, and in particular cruise tourism around that area. And that disconnect between ship rules and local laws, it's already creating a real risk for cruisers, and I'm talking right now. In case you missed it, as of this month, Mexico has banned the import, sale, and marketing of vapes and e-cigarettes. Now, cruise lines may still allow vaping on board, most of them do, just in designated areas, but once you step your happy little butt off that ship in Mexican ports, like popular Mexican ports like Cozumel, Costa Maya, Progreso, Cabo, bringing a vape on shore may be considered illegal importation. Now, this is a big deal because the penalties, they are not small. It will result in possible confiscation, but the big thing is fines up to $12,500 and possible detention. Now, enforcement of this is still evolving. We don't yet know how aggressively cruise port authorities in Mexico are going to check for vapes. But the law does exist, which means the risk exists. And this is a perfect example of that gap between cruise line policies and local laws. Your cruise line is not responsible for informing you about port regulations. That responsibility falls on you. So if you vape and you're cruising to Mexico, you got to decide whether bringing your vape to shore is worth the risk. Ignorance is not a defense. Now, let's talk about a move that could reshape where mass market cruising goes next. Carnival Cruise Line just announced that it's heading to Africa for the first time in 2027. Carnival Sunshine will visit La Goulette in Tunisia. I was just there last summer. It's a very unique and distinctive and different cruise port. I know some cruisers don't love it. I thought it was really cool. By the way, I have an entire port guide on that destination. If you are eyeing one of Carnival's African itineraries, you want to know more at least about the Tunisian call. But another planned port of call is Tangier in Morocco. So they're going to be part of an expanded Mediterranean season that runs from late May through October. Now, for Carnival, this is a big shift. This is a brand that is built on the more mainstream destinations for American audiences. We're talking Caribbean, Mexico, Alaska. Now, Europe is there, it's played a smaller role, and Africa as a continent has been completely absent. So this deployment signals a serious effort to diversify destinations, and I think this might be testing the water to see whether Carnival's core audience is going to follow the brand into this new territory. Now, as I mentioned, La Goulette, I was there last summer, it has been growing as a cruise port, with passenger numbers up 32% last year, and cruise calls up 43% from the year before. Tangier opens the door to Morocco's culture and access to both the Mediterranean and the Atlantic, but the most strategic piece is this. Carnival Sunshine will also host a solar eclipse cruise in August 2027. The ship will be positioned directly in the path of maximum visibility. Now, this is not just a new destination play. This is a once-in-a-lifetime event tied to a specific sailing. And by the way, I just cruised Carnival Sunshine back in August. I cruised it to Bermuda. It's a really nice kind of mid-sized ship. So I think this is a good one to put on these test itineraries. Now, after the Mediterranean season, Carnival Sunshine will return to the United States and home port in Galveston in November 2027. And speaking of Galveston, I love you, Galveston. I love you, Texas. And man, you gotta brace yourselves, because if you're sailing from there this weekend, this is something you're gonna want to pay attention to. I'm sure you know, it's all over the news. I live in the Midwest/South in Kentucky-Ohio border, and it's all we can talk about. And in fact, I'm prepared to hunker down for the whole weekend. I got my bread, I got my milk, I'm good to go. But if you don't know what I'm talking about this. A powerful Arctic cold front is hitting southeast Texas late Friday into Saturday. So by the time you watch this, we're gonna know if it was all a big fat nothing or it really was a big deal. Winter storm watches are in effect with potential freezing rain and ice accumulation. Galveston could see a hard freeze with lows around 29 degrees, which I say, that's nothing, but I know it's different in Texas. It hits you harder there. And dangerous wind chills overnight into Monday morning. Now, of course, this is not normal for Galveston. So if you're embarking this weekend, weather could impact road conditions, airport operations, and embarkation timing. So make sure that you are prepared. And as always, friends, get your travel insurance. I have a whole guide, I have a video, I have all the stuff, but get your insurance, because stuff like this happens even out of Texas. Who would think this massive winter storm warning in Texas during cruise season, but it happens. Now, cruise lines, of course, they're gonna try their best to stay on schedule, but icy roads and delayed flights, they're obviously beyond their control. Now, it's a little too late to plan. If you're flying in, you're probably already there, hopefully, knock on wood, but this is one of those rare situations where getting to the ship might be more of an adventure than the cruise itself. Now, the good news is, once you're on board, hopefully you make it on board on time, uneventfully, warmer weather is ahead. The risk, though, is everything that happens before you step on that gangway. So if you don't have travel insurance, just get it. I've got my guide. I'll get you a quote within like an hour. And even if you don't buy insurance from me and my team, just get your travel insurance and stay safe and stay warm.